Is your cold making it hard for you to get to sleep and leading to a bad morning? Switch to Mucinex Night Shift for fast, powerful nighttime multi-symptom cold and flu relief. Mucinex Night Shift fights your worst nighttime symptoms to help you get to sleep and wake up ready to go. Mucinex Night Shift. It's comeback season. Use as directed.
Bombas presents unsolicited gifting advice. Number 1, if they say not to get them anything, get them something. 2, underwear is a great gift, just not for your boss. And 3, those absurdly soft Bombas socks and slippers you've been eyeing for yourself, they'll love those. And the fact that for every item you purchase, another is donated to someone who needs it, they'll love that even more.
Go to bombas.com/Spotify and use code Spotify for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/Spotify, code Spotify.
During this election season, enjoy a special sale on your DSR Network membership. Use code ELECTION24 to get 50% off your membership. Because the news might be overwhelming, but the analysis of the news doesn't have to be. Let the DSR Network give you something to look forward to by becoming a member and getting exclusive election content, ad-free listening experiences, and access to our Discord and Slack communities. So up until the election, go to thedsrnetwork.com/buy and use code ELECTION24 to get a discount that will make this election season not only bearable, but enjoyable. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code ELECTION24. We hope you enjoy the show.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. On Thursday, Kamala Harris's campaign released a very hard-hitting ad featuring Donald Trump's quotes about the need for a punishment for abortion. It tied this directly to the terrible stories we've been hearing about women suffering and dying under abortion bans passed after Dobbs. If Harris is going to win this election, it'll probably be due to women who are driven to the polls in part by messages just like this one. Is it possible that we're underestimating the political energy of women in the post-Dobbs era, just as happened in 2022? Today we're discussing this with Jennifer Murcia, a professor of political communications who writes and tweets a lot about how political rhetoric and public opinion really work. Great to have you on, Jennifer.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, first let's play this ad in full.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no?
There has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah.
And the punishment is real. Women denied care, unable to get pregnant again, traumatized, scarred for life. Young women who didn't need to die. Now 1 in 3 women live under a Trump abortion ban. And if he's elected, everyone will.
There has to be some form of punishment.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Jennifer, what's interesting here, I think, is how this ad takes Trump's misogyny and gives it powerful, concrete, real-world relevance. What's your takeaway from all this?
Yeah, absolutely. The connection of the word punishment, there must be some punishment for the woman, which is repeated several times in the sort of question and answer with Trump. And then the juxtaposition of all of the women who suffered really extreme medical emergencies, life-threatening situations, really does connect that notion of Trump is punishing women physically, of course, emotionally, and in all other ways because of the abortion ban.
Yes, the ad makes it really visceral. What it essentially says is, you see that misogyny all the time on your TV screen. Well, it's actually ill will towards you. I haven't seen it made this visceral before myself. Have you?
I have, because I went to the Houston rally that Harris had, and the entirety of the rally was about this issue explicitly. When conservatives and religious people think about abortion and abortion bans, they think about elective abortion. And so what the Harris campaign has done very wisely, I think, is show how it's actually healthcare. It's not, these women who are getting elective abortions that are being punished. It's actually women who just in the routine matters of pregnancy and the things that can go wrong with pregnancy end up suffering directly from Trump's ban. And the thing about it being a visceral response, I think, is really key, because what it does is it takes Trump's threats away from just something that happens on the screen, and it makes it something that every single woman understands can happen to them. And any woman who's been pregnant and has a child, any woman who's been through that situation, they know all of the things that can go wrong, because all of the messages that are directed at women while they're pregnant are about all of the dangers and risks. And it's a very high stakes thing. More women die giving birth than in any other situation. So it's really threatening.
That kind of talk about doctors and patients is really directly aimed toward this particular constituency of right-leaning, maybe independent, maybe moderate Republican women whose negative partisanship gets triggered by talk that's overly Democratic sounding. Yeah. But when it's about doctors and patients, this is something everyone can relate to. It doesn't have that partisan trigger in it, right?
Absolutely. And all of the research that we have is that things like freedom and choice resonate across the political spectrum. And nobody thinks that the government should be making healthcare decisions for them personally. And so I think that the message that the Harris campaign is using, right, which is Donald Trump should not be making your healthcare decisions for you. The government should not be making the healthcare decisions for you. That should be between you and your doctor, period. I think that those messages resonate across the political spectrum.
Absolutely. And by the way, also to your point about how this is really about Trump wanting to punish women, Trump has embraced that idea himself. I want to play something Trump said on the campaign trail. Listen to this.
He said, "Sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say, pay these guys a lot of money. Can you believe it?" I said, "Well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them."
Note that Trump disagreed with his advisors over this. I think that what that really shows is that Trump is very consciously doing this kind of thing because he thinks it appeals to the male voters he needs to turn out in big numbers. He's openly declaring that the misogyny, that the punitive nature of what he's talking about toward women is itself essential to winning this election.
Yeah, Trump likes to pretend he's a truth teller. And so, despite best practices, despite all of the consultants' opinions, Donald Trump is fearlessly, being misogynistic. I don't know if that message is going to convince any women to vote for him. But yeah, I think it certainly will resonate with men. It's interesting to think about the way that Trump sort of says that line. There's a really smart researcher on authoritarianism, Karen Stenner, and she had retweeted that. And what she said was, pay attention to how he says the word woman. And if you listen to it, it's really interesting because it's like so much visceral anger and hatred just dripping off of his tongue, as he says the word woman. And I think that that's very indicative of Trump's approach to women in general. So, in the book that I wrote about Trump's 2016 campaign, I wrote about how he treats women as objects and how sometimes they are treasured objects. If they make Trump look good, if they're beautiful, if they, bear children for him, then he praises them and says how great they are and how much he loves them. But if they make Trump look bad, then they very easily become hated objects. And it's a very interesting approach to women. They're sexy objects or they're hate objects. And clearly what we're seeing from Trump in 2024 is that women are hate objects that need to be controlled, that should be denied rights, that shouldn't have the freedom to decide what they do with their bodies, that probably shouldn't even have the right to vote. That's all sort of condensed in these messages that we're getting from him.
Well, I mean, he actually said straight out that whether women want his protection or not, they're going to get it. Right? I mean, yeah. To your point, I mean, it's really interesting because it's almost like he decides who's in the charmed circle and who isn't.
That's right. And it's authoritarian, obviously. One of the really interesting things in the research that I've done on the neo-Nazi community, white supremacist community, is the way that they linked anti-feminism to their neo-Nazi and white supremacist ideals. And so if you go back to like Daily Stormer in 2014, 2015, they're saying arguments about anti-feminism as being essential to understanding white supremacy, and that, you know, women's only place is in, you know, making babies to replace the race, essentially, and that they shouldn't have a voice within the white supremacist community, you know, and all of those kinds of things. That feminism itself is part of the problem and part of the reason why, you know, this sort of great replacement theory is working. And so women are treated as hate objects, of course, in that discourse. And that discourse has become mainstream and is certainly like a key part of the Republican Party today.
I think you really see that as well with J.D. Vance's cat ladies comment. Women who don't have children are in some sense inferior, or at least to be scorned in some sense. I really find it interesting that you tie it to great replacement theory, because there is kind of a grand unified theory here in which the nation and its strength and vitality relies on a certain type of production and of children, the right amount of children per family. Those who don't contribute to the population in that way are suspect, or at least not really doing their citizenship duty in some sense, right?
Absolutely. It's the essential role of the woman is to reproduce the white race is the argument that they make. And it's essentially what we're seeing now, right? So the fear and the threat is that there are too many non-white women who are having babies. And so therefore we have to get rid of those non-white people, kick them out of the country, deny their children citizenship, prevent them from entering the country. And then we need to make sure that more white women have babies. That's the plan, as I understand it.
Well, you know, they'll, of course, adamantly deny that there's anything racial to it. But each of these things is an interlocking part of a whole vision, right? You know, great replacement theory, they will say something like, oh, we're only talking about political replacement. They want to replace native-born Americans with immigrant voters. That's not racial. Then they'll turn around and say, oh, we want women to reproduce more in order to contribute to the nation. Oh, that's not racial. But if you put it all together, it becomes a racial, a message steeped in racial nationalism.
And like I said, you know, this is a message that I saw sort of percolating in 2015 on the white supremacist websites, which are avowedly white supremacists. They, of course, supported Donald Trump in 2016 and did meme warfare for him and all of those sorts of things. And so, yeah, I mean, it really is the sort of taking over of the Republican Party by the sort of InfoWars mentality, the white supremacist mentality, and partnering with the Christian nationalists who share a lot of agenda and goals, a lot of the same things.
Politico reports that in the battleground states, there's a 10-point gender gap in the early voting thus far. Women are roughly 55% of the early vote, and men are 45%. It's unclear what that will mean on election day and beyond, but it could be a sign of heightened energy among female voters. I also wonder whether we're seeing some crossover vote in this early voting, in which a sliver of Republican women are voting for Harris early. What's your sense of all these things?
It's really hard to guess, to be honest, right? So even, you know, if on paper they're registered as a Republican, you don't know that they actually voted for Trump once they got there. And so I think it's a dangerous game to try to guess. And, you know, predictions about future facts are always weak. But it does seem as though since Dobbs, there has been a huge amount of energy for women. You know, the way that the campaigns, the Harris campaign in particular, has targeted women with their messaging, I think has been very smart the excitement that you see online, the positivity. And, there's been a lot of really exciting things happening in culture that have been very female driven. So I'm thinking of like the Eras tour with Taylor Swift. I'm thinking about the Barbie movie, right? Both of those things are very joyful celebrations of women and women's power, right? That have shaped economies, right? Like around the world.
Yeah.
And so I think that if the Trump campaign is counting on the women's vote, I think that they ought to rethink that plan. But I don't know for sure. And I don't think anyone else does either.
Well, it sounds like you're suggesting that we might be really on the threshold of a fairly big cultural event. I mean, I'm not predicting Harris is going to win. It's extremely close. Either one of them could win. There are some signs that things are starting to move her way, but, those signs could be misleading. But if she does win, you can kind of see how it would represent a kind of confluence of all these cultural streams, right? I mean, can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And so historians will tell it that way, right? They'll tell that story.
Yeah.
They'll say, like, after Dobbs, there's this sort of gender awakening that happens through Beyonce, through Taylor Swift, through the Barbie movie, through TikToks, and right, they'll tell that story. I think it's also interesting that Kamala Harris is not running, quote unquote, as a woman, right? She's not centering that. She is centering women's issues in addition to other issues like, the economy is in a way a woman's issue, and caring for elderly parents is in a way a women's issue. But she's not centering the campaign around herself as, this unique woman who ought to be president the way that Hillary Clinton did in 2016. And I looked at the polling about, sort of beliefs in feminism and things like that in 2016. And what I found actually surprised me, which was how negative feminism was seen at that time. So I think in particular, 2016 was a bad time to be running a campaign saying, I'm like the new power broker or whatever, like I'm the first woman president. It's happening. I think that now is probably a better time to be running that kind of campaign, but Kamala Harris isn't choosing to do that. And perhaps she's learned from what happened to Hillary Clinton in 2016. But I do think that if she wins, and I'm hopeful that she will, and I think we have lots of reasons to believe she will, that when we tell this story, it will be about the women's vote.
Look, I think you're getting at a really interesting tension of sorts. On the one hand, as you say, she's not centering the historic nature of her candidacy. But on the other, she's speaking directly to women about women's issues and is actually speaking a cultural language that is really very much about this being a moment for women. That's just fascinating. I think you really nailed it. And also, Hillary, I think, unfortunately, probably was the wrong icon to do that.
Yeah.
And Harris just might be the right one. What's the difference there? Why? I mean, Harris is incredibly shrewd culturally, isn't she? She's really tuned into kind of what's going on under the surface.
She's running an amazing campaign. So Hillary Clinton is a very smart person. So is Kamala Harris. Not to take anything away from either of them. The difference is in persuadability, right? So when you run a presidential campaign, you want to be able to tell your story and introduce yourself to the nation. You want them to be open to learning about who you are, and you want to be able to tell that story in a way that resonates with people. Hillary Clinton did not have that opportunity. Everyone thought they knew who Hillary Clinton was. They had their mind made up whether it was good or bad, and she did not have the opportunity to tell her story as a presidential candidate in 2016. That story was already told. She was already defined. Kamala Harris, even as vice president, people were like, yeah, who? I don't really know her. I don't know two facts about Kamala Harris. And so she has really had the opportunity to tell her story. And the way that she has chosen to tell her story is that she is someone who wants to protect others, that she has spent her career speaking up for people who don't already have a voice, that she's done it in a nonpartisan way. and that as an elected official, she has continued to work to solve problems, help people, defend people that need to be defended, and protect people that need to be protected. And so in a way, she's using a lot of very masculine kinds of tropes, right? Like, I will be a protector for you. I will help you. But she's doing it in a way that folds in all of those women's concerns. Like, I see you. I see that you're struggling to raise your family and take care of your parents. I know how impossible that is, right? And so she's been able to connect who she is and who she wants us to see, right? You know, who she wants to present us with her story in a way that Hillary Clinton was just not able to do. And so in that way, I've always thought that Hillary Clinton was a bad candidate in 2016, just because she couldn't define herself.
Well, I wonder whether she's fairly or not associated with the battles over feminism in the 60s and 70s and the backlash to that. And Harris obviously is just not associated with those things. She really had much more of a kind of clean shot to define these issues in ways that wouldn't kind of trigger people's associations with those times and stuff. I want to play another ad that the Harris campaign put out just before her trip to Texas, which you mentioned earlier, where she did a rally about reproductive rights. Listen.
For 54 years, they were trying to get Roe v. Wade terminated, and I did it.
He did it. It was pretty devastating.
He is bragging about the rights that he stole from American women. And Trump is promising to do more. In Project 2025.
They are restricting birth control,
tracking pregnant women, enforcing a nationwide abortion ban. The government should get out of my business.
Stay out of my business.
That's not the government's business.
In America, women make their own decisions.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
So Harris gave that speech in Texas, but it was aimed directly at women in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, Madison, and Detroit. Now, note the women talking in the ad. This is an issue that's generating horrific stories that women are talking to each other about. You mentioned earlier that this really could be a moment among women that we don't quite understand. Is that ad talking to that as well? What's the potential here?
Yeah, one of the things that I think that the ad is trying to address is the indifference that some people in blue states might have, right, to the sort of problem of the abortion question. So if you're a woman in a blue state, you might feel safe, and I think that part of what Harris needs to do is to break through to those women and to say, you are not safe in your blue state. No one is safe. And if Trump is reelected, especially, he has plans to make sure that no one has access to this kind of health care. And so part of it is cracking through that indifference. But yeah, I mean, again, just showing how visceral the consequences are to having someone else make your healthcare choices for you and to have the ability to deny you healthcare. I think that there's something that it resonates as so un-American to people to think that way, and it's one of the reasons why, for example, we don't have, complete government control over hospitals and we don't have free healthcare. Part of it is because the American public is a little bit afraid of what that might mean. And so kind of tapping into those concerns and really trying to make it resonate.
Yeah, I mean, she's really leaving it all on the field in a way. Kamala Harris, I mean.
It's a great campaign.
It really is. I mean, I just want to return to close out to how shrewd it is culturally. I'm only just coming to understand that now, but this is probably something, given your lens on things, you were probably perceiving from the outset. It's just been sort of almost perfectly calibrated to capture a very specific moment. Now, will it be enough? I don't know. There are all kinds of headwinds. It could be enough. But either way, I think you have to acknowledge that it's just amazingly attuned to the cultural moment in a way that is really quite complex and interesting. You want to reflect on that a bit?
It is. It's absolutely complex and interesting and very much of the moment. And one of the things that I've really realized in the last week or so is that no two people are experiencing this election in the same way. Because of the way our feeds and algorithms and the idiosyncratic, haphazard news, that we sort of all are exposed to, we are each a unique data point in terms of what this election looks like. And so the kinds of things that are able to cut across like large groups of people, so an entire demographic like being women, and those are the kinds of things that are going to have the capability, at least, of having the most impact. And so I think that she's really targeting a campaign that will display positivity and uplift, and that meets people where they are with their needs and their concerns. Especially women in my age demographic. We were home with kids with COVID, trying to do our jobs and trying to keep our kids safe at the same time. Now that we're not doing exactly that anymore, we're still sort of traumatized by the experience. And that's another word she's used a lot in her speeches. When she talks about Trump's impact on our lives, she talks about trauma. And I think that that's a really important thing to talk about, because we do feel that trauma.
Really, really remarkably interesting stuff. Jen Murcia, thank you so much for such a fascinating discussion.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler on the DSR Network.